Here we are in 1937, moving into the second turn, and I want to kind of step back like I like to do in a lot of games. I don't know that I zoomed in all that well or all that closely because I didn't pay attention to every card play, but I'd like to abstract it even more than that during this phase of the game at the very least. Probably zoom back in when combat starts. But there is a little bit I want to look at that we haven't done yet. So, for example, victory check. Well, we know nobody's won, but let's take a look. So Germany is at 13 for their production. They get 0 for this. They have 1 for an atomic research. That puts them to 14. And that's it. They have to get to 25 to win, but you can see it's not that far in some ways. Collecting up peace dividends, I guess they're 0.6 per turn on average. And boosting your production is going to get you towards that. And obviously also if you're working towards the atomic bomb, you can grab the atomic bomb. Can you make it before somebody declares war or something? Well, you know, that depends. You might be in a race with them for the production victory or otherwise. Over here, the Russians are a little less at 11 with no add-ons. And the Allies are nowhere near in their production, but they're also perhaps the weakest militarily, which is a little funny, right? If you think 1936, and the German army is more weakened by the treaties than anyone else's. Yes, everyone's downgraded their army to a lower level, but they've got specific treaties binding them from Versailles that they more or less have to repudiate and build up from, and they start doing this in 36 and 37. The Rhineland hasn't been reoccupied yet. That's not even represented here. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on that's kind of key importance that's just been dumped away. So my feeling is, like with the Maginot Line, the history to this game is pretty much non-existent. I mean, it is a World War II prequel themed game rather than one that's treating the subject matter with any real seriousness, which is funny because there's a fair amount of detail in play here, right? It's kind of strange to say, well, it's not a simulation, but we're worried about unit strength, we're worried about the different types of units to the degree we are, yet it feels like it's actually less of a simulation than, say, Axis and Allies is. So I'm not quite sure what to say about this. It's a very strange design decision coming out, and I know it's well liked, but wow, that's odd. Let me tell you what the effect of this is, right? At least from what I see. So I can understand why you don't want the Western Allies, why you don't want France, say, which alone could have defeated Germany at this time, probably, being able to take military action against Germany right away. But that was not a military problem. That was a political problem. So you could say, well, somehow the political situation is represented by the military units on the board. Okay, then why is the German army so big, right? Why is it already so big? And it almost leads to, and I saw somebody describing this as what they believe is the ultimate Axis strategy, is build up heavy on military and try to take Paris and either London or Leningrad by, I think it's 37 or by 38. Well, there's not a lot of time for that, but so that's what you're devoting yourself to as a victory. That's a fairly unrealistic strategy. Simply, not that Germany couldn't possibly have just devoted everything to military and ignored their political and industrial concerns largely, but that the military could have grown rapidly enough in 38 to be that potent. In fact, the German military in 39 is historically was somewhat suspect, right? It isn't until 40 that they can conduct the offensive in France, when they had really unleashed their wartime footing after they've taken Poland already, and after they've removed the Russian threat completely. So the fact that such a strategy can work seems to ignore the political reality of the time. And the political reality is the thing that I'd expect this game to kind of get right? Now, the problem, though, is you'd have to have some sort of other system in play to allow the Allies to have a big army that they can't use. And that system doesn't exist here. It exists in Gathering Storm very nicely. And of course it exists in Origins of World War II, where political effort is more the focus of the game, and the military doesn't really exist except insofar as, it's represented by some of the political power. Days of Decision doesn't do as good a job, and I'm basically naming the 3 pre-war games that I have. Days of Decision doesn't do as good a job of preventing the Western Allies from doing something drastic, but they do have to have political effectiveness to engage in the more detailed actions that they can take, like occupying the Rhineland. And the same is true with Gathering Storm. And they can't simply declare war on Germany right off and march in. They actually in Days of Decision, no, there's restrictions against what the democratic countries can do there as well. So there's political reasons for preventing them from going on. Now, both of them attempt to simulate the situation, but you would think this would too, right? I mean, my hope in getting a game that is based on a subject matter that's historical, especially from a company like GMT, is that it has some correspondence to the historical situation, right? And this is beginning to feel like it has the same kind of correspondence that diplomacy has to the pre-World War I negotiations, which is almost none. I find myself not certain of what other people have built, and I think that's a potentially interesting way to play it. But I also think that, given that there's a record sheet, that's not the intention necessarily. And most of all, playing solo, I have the least idea of what kind of build-up I'm facing. So since these things are announced, I have decided to use the sheet as a record tracking, and I've tried to reconstruct what's going on. Some of it, like over here, who's got influence where, that's available on the map, but since there's space for it, what the heck? I'll write it out. So now the Allies ended up as the first player, which is not necessarily a good thing at all. You have to make your choices first. When it comes down to the important thing, the military, you have a choice in your cards as to what to put forth. So you have control over your order of play for military action. So this just sticks you with, hey, you're screwed going first in terms of making the big economic and production issues that you have to make. I see why I screw up on the ordering on these tracks. They go in different directions. The Russian track, now, if you're sitting here, the Russian track comes towards you this way, whereas if you're sitting here, the Allied track comes towards you this way. But if I stand from a single objective position, which of course playing solo I'm likely to do, this one goes to the left, this one goes to the right, or from the other direction, the opposite. That's an interesting little thing that's going to hurt my brain, I think. Production allocations, and this is a really great way to describe what's going on, is being able to have this chart. I actually feel like each player is going to want their own of this. Otherwise, if you only have one bookkeeper, they got to pass it around back and forth and everything. But so much of your information is going to be here. So what we see is not a lot of military buildup here. The West not going very diplomatic, but both the USSR and the Axis going with strong diplomacy. But the Axis is also going with heavy investment. Now, everybody is kind of limited by their industrial capacity. So you got to wonder about the Russian choice not to industrialize. They have a handful of additional industrialization. Remember, they pushed forward 2 last turn. I'm not sure everybody did that. The West only went forward 1. The Axis only went forward 1. So they've actually got a nice growth going already, but they also have a bunch of industrial cards in their hand. They could have kept going, which is something the other guys couldn't. So they didn't need as many industrial cards, and they're looking at a strong diplomatic offensive. When I look at the positions in terms of, hey, what can I do in terms of an offensive, right? Because to win the game by taking 2 capitals, subcapitals, whatever, well, for the Soviets, they've got one kind of near them with Delhi. The second one would have to be, I think, Berlin. And that's a tough slog. That means I'm fighting both sides. And that I would rather not do if I can help it. So ideologically, I'm less inclined to start the big war. Likewise, with the Western Allies, they're a little bit more capable of it because the Ruhr, Berlin, and Rome are all available to them within not too distant striking range, which means they might actually be the aggressors here. For the Axis, this is tough too. Paris and Britain are close to each other, but without the Z plan, you're not getting Britain, right? One would assume. Because remember, infantry are sitting ducks out at sea. They can't even run away. So if you send convoys of troops out, you would better have them well protected, and you need to have the naval dominance. So that's going to be a far reach. And then the other option is, hey, I can get Paris easily enough, and then I got to get Leningrad or Moscow. Those are the next ones that are available to me. You can ignore the United States, right? And that's really it. I mean, we're not going to be able to go get Delhi. That's there for the Russians to have a chance. Now, a huge Russian naval program might enable them a victory. I could see a Russian Axis combination with the Russians saying, I think I can take the Brits down if I build up a huge navy. And that's kind of secret, actually. That whole navy could be built up here in Leningrad. What's the danger with it? Well, the danger is that Denmark ends up pro-German or something, and you're not able to get through the sea zone. But as long as you're not at war with them, you can slip through that strait. So, there's potentials there for some interesting alliances to form. How does the Axis feel about that? Well, obviously, hey, if it's 2 against 1, one of the two is going to win, right? Probably, but unless the one specifically says, yeah, I can win the game with a strike on Paris and then shift with Barbarossa real quick. In which case, yeah, you could, and somebody's claiming that is the Italian or the Axis route to victory, the best route. Either that or a sea line. A build-up for sea line. Alrighty, so now we're going to be in the card play phase, and this takes forever. This is the meat of the game at this point in time. Maybe later, once you have your economies built and everything, and you start moving troops around, that becomes the focus of the game. We'll see. Moved around the government phase a few times this turn. What I'm doing to record the industrial, so the first time I move a space, I set it up like this, and then I turn it this way to help me remember what I've done. That's probably not a big deal when you're not playing solo, but you can see everybody's kind of invested in their industrialization. The Germans all the way up, everybody else kind of, hey, we don't need to play cards quite as quickly. The Russians have also built themselves some heavy tanks, which they're putting as a secret technology. I also had heavy bombers, which have a larger range. It didn't seem like as interesting a technology, but the heavy tanks is very intriguing. So I'm going to probably start focusing more on building armor. Remember, armor's not as good as infantry, but with the first fire capability, it makes it more exciting. And I don't have the combat order written there, so I gotta flip through the rules to look for that. Tanks go before infantry. Of course, they're not terribly good at killing anything but infantry, but if I can knock out some infantry early with the tanks, that'll give me a potent capability to soften the enemy up, even if I'm on the offensive, or if their infantry have artillery bonuses, which give first fire or whatever. The Germans finished up this sort of sequence through. There have been several with this Brothers in Arms, which allowed them to put an influence immediately, and they took that for Anschluss and they pushed Austria. Nobody can play anything in Austria anymore. It's completely converted over to the German side. I don't gain anything new, except I do gain some troops there. Vienna has a muster of 2, so I think I get 2 CV out of that, if I'm correct. I think that'll be under the diplomacy. Yeah, a single 2 CV unit in other cities. Given my setup, I'm not quite sure what I want. I certainly don't need a fortress there. I can't build navy there. I have so much infantry, though. I'm kind of considering a plane, mainly because it's difficult to move a lot of infantry due to the border limits. That's something you got to watch about building up too big an infantry army. So I think I want to diversify my forces a little bit. And planes have, I think, they don't have much movement actually. It's kind of a disadvantage. But given that armor is, I had to mark up my thing, and given that it's only a two space thing, but the point is that they don't count against the border limits because they're not land units moving across them. So they should be pretty helpful to me. All right. See some diplomacy being played. The Germans were dicky though. They stole a card, the double agent, from the Russians, and this may have been a big part of, hey, a card I kind of want to hold, but I also kind of want maybe for industrial investment because it's a big industry card, and now we lost that rather than, I mean, playing it to cancel things out is a total waste in terms of that's probably one of my most valuable cards in a lot of ways, which might be a reason to play it for the factory early, just because I don't know if I had anything else important. But you can see we're making a move on Afghanistan of all things. That's a serious threat on Delhi, opening up that possibility of maybe an anti-Allied position is not out of the question given this insertion into the Middle East. I have to consider though, what I can do and how things are going to fall out. If I make the move too early, well, we might end up with an Allied German alliance against me, or the tacit support of the Germans being a problem, and I have to build up a navy to win the game with a purely anti-Allied circumstance. I don't feel like any player really necessarily wants to start the war unless they feel they have an overwhelming, powerful advantage in terms of being able to grab 2 zones. Okay, things moved pretty quickly here. Brits starting to influence Poland. Russians knocked the Germans out of Sweden with a coup. And now the Germans have a neat choice. They had this birds of a feather, which would allow them to get one immediate into Poland. And they also have the somewhat painful foreign aid, which expends an industry to get one in Poland. The problem with, and that would convert Poland to an Axis power immediately. That's a lot of troops that Poland produces. Warsaw, I believe, has 3 muster points, and Lvov will give me 2, and Vilna will give me 1. So I'll have a bunch more units. Some of them maybe the armor. No, I don't. I'm not the guy with the armor bonus. That will help me, militarily, no question. I'll have additional population. Warsaw comes with 1 and Lvov comes with 1. Industrialization, not so much. Resources, a little bit for when the war starts, but I'm not sure I have the kind of resources that I need to conduct the war. So that's kind of the problem on Germany is, hey, I don't have the resources available to me until I do some diplomacy to start the war. Of course, attacking some of the miners, like Denmark or something, can get me into a good shape there. It's an expense, though, because I'm giving away industry, which is currently my greatest factor, but the population will shoot up above that, so it's kind of a limiting factor here. I don't know if I want to do that quite yet. Playing our way through mainly diplomatic plays at this point. There was a nice little exchange. The Brits did a sabotage on Germany. They finally decided, we're going to fire this off. Well, Germany had the double agent they stole from Russia. And boom, it reverses and hits the Brits instead. Not a good situation for them. They used up a good card. Of course, the Germans used up a good card too, but this is a huge thing. And the Brits were holding on to it with the thought of, I don't want to piss anyone off yet. Well, given that they got an Afghanistan to counter the Russian move here, they're really more worried about Germany and the Axis than they are about Russia overall. Russia probably can't beat them outright. If Germany starts building cadres, we don't know what they have. And in fact, they may already have a big navy here in the Ruhr that we just don't know about. We finish up the government card play with Germany indeed playing their foreign aid card. They did the birds of the feather first. They've got Poland. When we're losing a point in Poland, if we don't do it, it seemed just too much not to do, especially since we turned the tide on the Brits with that 1 card. Hey, what the hell? So we spent one of our industrial production, and now we have a bigger army, and we're more powerful. And Russia is kind of like, oh, I don't know if I was expecting that here. I had this guarantee I could have removed an influence, but I didn't use it. And I believe everybody's down to card limit at this point, taking into account the hidden technologies. Which means we do the diplomacy match off. And here, well, the Poland card is useless. The Afghanistan cancels out a Russian. And if the Germans had any, they would be canceled out as well. Norway is good. Turkey is fine. Greece is fine. And over here, we have additional ones. Okay, well, let's resolve the Russians first, since they'd be first in turn order. Hungary, well, we're close to getting control of Hungary, and that's one of the reasons we did it. We don't have another Hungary card. We do have another Hungary card. Screw it. Play this. We'll take control of Hungary. We would have gotten a chance to do that after the Germans did. I just wasn't paying much attention to it from that standpoint. So Hungary is a city. I get a 2-point unit there. Given how exposed that is, I'm going to make that a fortress. Okay. Remember, fortresses have the best capabilities, really. And yeah, when this fires off, that's what they get. They get an Afghanistan pip, and they get a Romania one, which strips away Germany's influence in Romania. Now, Afghanistan gives us nothing, but Romania was a population and 2 resources for the Germans. Oops. Well, we don't know which way this was facing because we bumped it. That's really the big problem with blocks, right? It's a clumsy solution as far as I'm concerned. No, I'm the clumsy solution. Yeah, okay. We got one in Norway. Norway gives us a resource back. Did the Russians gain anything? No, just Afghanistan. Turkey. Okay, we hit Turkey twice, which means Russia loses what we had in Turkey, which is a capital city, which was 1 population. Making sure I'm doing this in the right order because it goes different from everyone else's tracks. And we also lose a resource. Istanbul had population 2. So that's 2 population. We're going to have to count this. And we lose a resource. Okay. And then Germany slips in with the second point here, which means they get 2 populations and a resource. Okay. And the final one is Greece, which just gives us another resource. Resources are really important to the Axis because they're the folk who don't get enough of them. They're kind of important to the Allies except for one thing. The resources that are here in Central Europe and Turkey and whatever may not be very easy to hold on to. The resources are important because I gotta bother getting them from elsewhere, but the real question is, well, probably something like Portugal is worth grabbing, Latin America is worth grabbing, but when we're talking about Indian resources or something, we may be losing some of our bonus resources that we're kind of counting on. In fact, Iraq as well, which can come around this way if I can't trace directly through the Med, one way or the other. All right. Well, I'm going to have to do a recount and make sure I've got everything right, because maybe I miscounted on Turkey. Games with tracks often don't work for me quite right. Again, I'm finding it hard to justify spending any of my potential diplomatic cards, or even if I'm not terribly interested in the diplomacy. Here I'm holding a Russian card that I'm not really too interested in. Denmark and the Low Countries. Denmark might be interesting if I build that navy, but right now, you know, this is a useless card, but it's got a high value. If I take any military operations that have any meaning, which I don't really desire to do. I mean, unless I'm going to invade Turkey, the value of attacking seems low. And a couple of times a day it flies right overhead. All the real planes and everything are no problem, but that thing just buzzes. And sometimes it's hunting for someone and it just circles my building and then I hide. Okay, so, you know, that's kind of useless card, but if I had all for diplomacy, but it's possible somebody will play something and steal it from me. And I'd rather have the padding of that extra card at that point. The only risk with that is, well, it is kind of dead wood sitting in my hand, but it's not all that dead. If I do have to undertake a military campaign, that's not a bad card to have with it. Right now, with the Russians, I need industrialization. That's my low point here. I've collected up some population. I've got a ton of resources because of Persia. And there's just no real reason for me to focus on, moving my armies and attacking something and giving other people additional cards. Same with the Germans. They're still behind in industrialization. Now, they have a resource deficit, but it's hard to get a good idea of how I'm going to gain many resources by handing things off to someone else. An attack on Hungary, obviously I can't do that now. It's too late. If there was something that was devolved towards one of the other sides, I might play into going to war with that. Romania is a possibility. To attack something, because I really do need those resources once I'm in war. But if I'm not in war, you can always think of, well, maybe I'll be able to do things. Maybe I don't quite have to make that invasion at this point. This is still early in the game. And for the Brits and the French, they really don't have a military that they could do much with. But on the other hand, for the Germans, there's kind of we'd really eat up our resources if we launched an attack. Of course, if you look at things, France has a couple of resources in it. Yummy, right? It's something to consider, but I'd rather build up some resources here if I can. Cards favor me, the Axis in Romania, in their traditional allies that are considered more, fascist-aligned countries, and some that aren't actually tending that way, or didn't actually join the Axis, had some tendencies that way. Turkey, Spain, Sweden to some extent, even Yugoslavia and Greece. You could see where there might be an argument for, well, I got cards that go with those, so I feel very unwilling to play things that way. Brits ought to consider fortifying some of these things. Still getting peace dividend. Here in the production phase, they divvied things up. West actually built a cadre. It's a fortification in Malta. But we see people are starting to build up their points. The Germans spent 6 on CVs, mainly on the East Front. And that starts worrying the Russians, who respond with only 2 of their own, building up some of the fortifications they have in the East. They're very worried about a German move eastward at this point. East is kind of nice for Germany. They can take Leningrad and Moscow, boom, boom, if they overwhelm the Russians. And the Russians don't know what's sitting here. It can't be too exciting. We have heavy tanks, which is pretty decent. That, I think, just gives us the movement? No, that gives us first fire, which is pretty sweet, actually. Just in case the Germans have a bunch of armor. Our armor's better. We have tank killers. Whatever. Anyway, still a heavy attempt at investment, but a little bit more balanced. The Germans splitting between investment and action cards. They've got some thoughts on their own mind of attacking Romania this turn. Now they do that, and they give 2 cards to each of their opponents, and that's a pretty big boost, really. And I think those are automatically action cards. I don't think you get additional industrialization through that. And, well, I guess we move on to the government play. Oh, The Germans have to go first this time, which is fine. They probably have the most cards. All right, heavy industrialization and then some diplomacy. And the diplomacy was kind of big. For example, the Germans grabbed Finland. We see some conflict here. So, for example, Afghanistan is going to be taken away from the Russians. And that has no value, actually, except as a means of moving. The industrialization came at cost, so the Brits threw away some technology. They could have had heavy tanks or motorized infantry, either of which are nice. But drawing more cards is nice too, or building up your armies is probably better than the technology. Over here, Finland swings completely over. That gives us just a resource. But it also gives us the military in Finland. That's a town. We get to put one thing there. We got to decide, do we want to fortify Finland or do we want a ground unit there? That's a hard call because Finland's pretty damn exposed where it is, but it's also, a way of drawing forces off. If it's fortified, it's not going anywhere. And then the question becomes, do the Russians attack it or not? If it's troops, it does become somewhat more interesting in the sense that they can actually launch an attack into Leningrad and support the attacks through into Leningrad. Maximum of 2 units going through there. Resources are important to me, and I can trace them through Sweden and Denmark, so I'm going with the fort. On the Russian side, they grabbed Romania, which is worth a crappy resource that I don't need. They grabbed Sweden, which is actually valuable. That's 2 population, right? No, 1 population and 2 resources. And I don't really need resources, but I'm sure baking them up. And then 1 in Greece, which takes a resource away from the Germans. It's kind of dicky, but it is an opposed game. And that's going to push us into spring. And the Germans have a card that they want to play here for summer. Because I think... Wait, what happened in Romania? I think I put this here instead of... I don't think they should be in Bulgaria. They didn't have anything in Bulgaria, and I remember Romania being up there. Yeah, that should be in Romania. I hope I gave the extra resource for that. Now I gotta recount because I may have miscounted. I think the Russians are up a resource. Anyway, the Germans are planning on using one of their cards to invade Romania because it's not, it's only leaning towards the Soviets. It's not aligned with them yet. It's not at the same situation that Hungary's in. We're also moving more and more into an anti-Soviet stance. With that, we need to take Moscow and Leningrad. And that's going to mean that the Western Allies are probably going to be Russia's savior. I get the feeling, though, that the decisions as to which way somebody decides to go and who kind of gets powerful and gets ready to get the knockout blow is what's going to drive the game. That it's got less to do. I don't know. It's only a 3-player game. That's the thing. And a 3-player game is always tough to balance. Hitler's War does it, as do most World War II games, by saying, essentially, it is the Axis against the Allies, and the Soviets and the Western Allies are the Allies. Well, the United Nations, right? By playing and giving this kind of freedom where the Russians can actually attack the Western Allies, and they can do that in Days of Decision with as well, you begin to open up new dynamics. But I don't know how affecting they are, for the simple fact that the Axis is sitting here in the middle of both of them and kind of more powerful than either. You know? So it's like, yeah, I take Delhi, you take Paris, who's going to get Britain, right? Because that's what it comes down to. Or who's going to be able to effectively turn on the other and screw them so bad, right? So that's the danger of going. And also, you'll always be at war. So if the Russians declare war on Britain, they're minus a victory point if it comes down to that. So if stasis remains, that's going to be presumably a fair-sized penalty against them. Especially if the Germans kind of, no, I didn't mean it. Sorry, you go ahead. I'll take a couple more peace dividends before I join in. What do you do as Russia then? You've already declared war. You grab Delhi. Britain's probably not thrilled with you at that point. Well, nothing happened in springtime just because of the cards people have that they want to play. This is kind of a weird dynamic here too. Yeah, I want to attack Romania because I can afford to give up Latin America and Austria is already committed. But, this is the kind of decision making that I hate in CDGs and in terms of, yeah, I've got the choice between taking some reinforcements, launching an offensive, let those take something, or conducting diplomacy in France. What? I don't know. Okay, so the first player here is the Axis in the summertime. Now, if I want my full movement point thing, and it's not like you can't choose to do your action later, but if I want my full movement point thing, I have to commit the card here in the summer during the command phase. And that's what I'm going to do. And then the Western Allies aren't going to do anything. Now, here's the thing. If I passed and everyone else passed, which has been the general case, nobody gets to do anything, and I lose my opportunity to play the card when it's richest. For the Russians, we also have a card we're not so sure we want, which is this Denmark Low Countries. Denmark has no population. The Low Countries have population, which is getting close to being important. Do we need to reallocate at this point? I mean, we see that and we're like, oh shit, we could be being declared war on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop on odds. I play the card. I'm going to count that the Germans are not going to come storming in. Now, this could be a hell of a surprise for me, right? Except, what am I really going to do? I can defend the border a little stronger. Well, gee, the Russians aren't attacking, aren't moving. Maybe we could. We have 7 actions. We look for this and put it up there or something. Oh, I should actually have these to record the hand size based on the tech. God, going in the wrong direction. Based on the tech that I have. Okay, for whatever it matters. So, now the Axis has some movement they want to make. Well, we can declare a violation here. And this is a country where the city has a muster value of 2, which I believe means 2 cards for each of my opponents from the dip deck. This doesn't count. They don't have to worry about their hand size at this point. They just get some additional popular support. And hey, that might translate into US support, right? Okay. Now I have to worry about placing the fortress here. and it doesn't really matter. I'm not sure how it should be facing. I guess a different direction from everyone else, right? I don't know. Okay. Because nobody's controlling them. And now I have 7 movement, and everybody knows what there is. Well, one of the movement is going to be across the stream. I can get 2 ground units through that stream. That's one movement. Let's look at my combat charts and see a fortress is not terribly good against air units, so you probably won't do air. So there's 3 movement value. For 5 movement value. He can move 2 spaces. Wrong chip. I got 2 more movement. I don't have any big units here. Move these forward. Really not perfectly positioned, but that's okay. And now I've used up all my command points. Now, according to the sequence of play, I get my combat phase. Well, we have a battle that must happen, and I guess I can mark that with one of these in case there's multiple battles that must happen. These guys should be flipped like this, presumably facing their owner or whatever. But now that we're in the battle, we'll face it like this. And there's no surprise, because it's a minor F, if I recall correctly, which would just give first fire. And the fortification is good against ground units. So I'm going to roll 2 dice against ground units. I need 4s. I got 1 hit. It's got to take off the biggest unit. Okay. Do I have the sequence here? I do not. I chose not to reveal any tech. I gotta look at the combat sequence, which... Fortresses, maybe it's... Fortress, Air Force, Carrier, Sub... Fleet, tank, yeah, it goes in this order. I wish there was a numbering of some sort as to the ordering. So the Air Force is next. And yeah, I know I don't like these big dice. I've got 4 points of air units. So I get all 4 of my dice that exist. And I guess that's why there's 4 dice, is the biggest units are 4s. I'm shooting at a fortress. I would guess that's a ground unit? Yes. I need 1s to hit. I missed with everything. And now we go to the next round, and I have 2 rolls of 2 against it, and I think you're supposed to allocate on a per unit basis, actually. Which is why you only need actually 4 dice. So an infantry shooting at a ground unit needs a 3. Armor's actually not as good as infantry. That makes sense, but armor in this is almost like cav in like a Napoleonic game. So I need 3s. I got 1 hit. Drops him down. Means I get to roll for the second one because I didn't wipe it out. I get another 2 hits actually. The fortress is gone. Romania is gone, which means I lose a Russian population and 2 resources. And yes, I was wrong in the number on them, but I corrected it. And the Germans gain Romania as a possession. The planes do not, I believe, have to withdraw because I captured it. So I gain a population and 2 resources. And now Romania is, part of Germany. Okay, well, that's going to push us to blockades. Nobody's at war. And then to a fall turn. And I have to contemplate whether this situation has unbalanced the frontier enough that maybe the Russians can launch a successful attack. Russia is furious about the Polish-German combined aggression against Romania, but when it comes down to it, there really is nothing they can do about it. I could reposition some troops, but it would cost me a diplomatic card I don't want to spend. So I'll just take the diplomatic advantage of the cards that I took. I'm not going to declare war on Germany for the possible advantage of maybe taking Finland, and I don't even have enough points to really get into Vilna either. And if I play a card, Germany can play a card to sort of offset the surprise effect. I still get the first fire effect, but both sides are mobilizing. Both sides are prepared for action in that case. And that pretty much ends the year. And we will push forward into 39 because of that. There's really nothing too exciting that happens. The winter, I could play any card to shift my Russians around. I may do that because I may want to get Russians to the front for spring. Indeed, I did. I played a Latin America USA card. Now, that US could have been useful. I could play that against the German diplomatic effort there. That would bring the US closer to the Western Allies. But, I'm competing with the Western Allies too. Let's let them dig their own hole out of there. But we've put up something of a barrier, and that puts us in a position where Germany is a lot less able to make an offensive very easily. And we're also threatened in Poland. Look at all those units on the border there. From the German side, they're not seeing the faces of them. When you look at the faces of them, when you think about how many builds that the Russians have done, you start to see, that's not that much, really. A lot of it's fortresses, and but you don't know that as the Germans, and you do know that they built up some. All right. You got to be careful of, and this kind of may explain an attack on Russia, right? Victory in this game, because it's based on your production, may or may not involve your resource availability. Right now, the Russians have 16, or the Germans have 16 production, which will drop to 12 if they go to war. So people who might be worried, they have 3 of these, that brings them up to 22. If that's an atomic, it goes up to 23. Now, the reality is they're at about 20. But, they're sort of churning along here. There's room for expansion in terms of population. Where? Maybe not. The Low Countries, definitely. Sweden. Because population is their real limit as long as it's peacetime. So that's 2. It's going to be pretty tough to get Spain or something, but it's possible. The Italians could go do it. It looks like a pain in the ass. Of course, without the resources, we fall way down, right? We're talking about a 12 production instead of a 16. So that's a big hunk of our points. No one else is up there. The Brits don't have a whole hell of a lot of production, for example. They have 11 production here. So even though they've pulled some good points and are up to 15 total, no one knows that. Now, that could be an atomic. It isn't. The Russians also, their production is fairly high at 14, and they have no problem with the resources. So, declaring war on them isn't going to get rid of their victory points very quickly, but 14 plus... So we're at 15. But the Germans are actually at 20, and I believe, and that's, they're kind of like, maybe we don't need war here. Maybe we can make someone else take a victory point penalty to declare war on us. Of course, the problem there is, I bet it's two people who come in against us.